Hey, folks, I'm here to record and talk about part 3 of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. We started it last time in which the Lord went out hunting. He was hunting doe in the forest, and the lady, snuck into Sir Gawain's room in the morning and sat on his bed, and they had an awkward encounter. And then the Lord came back, and Gawain, gave Gawain his prize. Remember, they had this deal that whatever the Lord won hunting, he would give to Gawain. Whatever Gawain won in the castle, he would give to the Lord. And so the Lord gave Gawain all these deer that he hunted, and Gawain gave the Lord a kiss. The Lord was like, "Hey, where'd you get that kiss?" And Gawain was like, "No, we didn't talk about that." Right, and he avoided it. Well, it turns out that part 3 of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight is enormously famous, and it's known as the hunting and temptation scenes. So we're gonna do that today. Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, part 3, the hunting and temptation scene. So I want to talk about the scenes and give you an idea of what to expect and why they're famous now. And then I'm going to go back to the scenes and continue reading for you. So without further ado, let's start talking about that. Oh, whoa, lag. All right, part 3. Part 3 takes place over 3 days, the 29th, 30th, and 31st of December. It's important that you, as a reader, recognize that these 3 days are the last days of Gawain's life, and that he's going to be going to the axe, to the Green Man's axe on the 1st. He expects to die. So they represent sort of the last gasp of his life. We've talked about this baby being an allegory for a regular human being in their life cycle. And so, Gawain is being... they're called the temptation scenes because, Gawain's going to die and this woman is hotter than Guinevere. And so, how are you going to react on the last few days of your life when the most attractive woman you've ever met is throwing herself at you? But anyway, each of these 3 days, there's all kinds of threes in part 3. And it's really interesting, especially when you start talking about numerology and what the author's doing. Each of the 3 days is broken into 3 parts. Each day... Oh, yeah. So it takes place over 3 days, right? So like each day is in 3 parts. So 3 parts of each day times 3 parts is 9. That's a number of perfection. But the 3 parts of the hunting scene, the Lord's going to go out hunting an animal. The animal's going to change each day. Then we have the bedroom scene or the temptation scene, depending on which critic you're reading. And that's a scene where the lady is going to meet Gawain in his bedroom and attempt to seduce him, which we've already seen on day 1. And then there's going to be the reunion scene when the Lord and Gawain rejoin to trade quote-unquote winnings. And of course, some of you have already started putting 2 and 2 together, right? Like day 1, Gawain got a kiss from the lady, and we're talking about the code of chivalry. You're supposed to do what a lady asks you, but you're also supposed to be honorable to your fellow men. That means like treating the host with honor, keeping to the deal, keeping your word. And then you've got this faith element and this purity element that you got to think about as well. But Gawain kissed the lady, and then he kissed the Lord as a way to return that. And, that leads to all kinds of speculations. And one of the interesting things about the story, what happens if Gawain and the lady go further? Does Gawain and the Lord, we got to ask these questions as readers, and they create all sort of interesting situations in your head. And we can think about and talk about that as the scene goes on. So they rejoin and trade their winnings. Also, you'll notice if you're paying very carefully that within each hunting scene, the number 3 is mentioned at least 3 times. I think it's exactly 3 times. 3 hounds did this, or 3 this or 3 that. So keep your eye out for 3s. The author definitely is doing some numerological things with his number symbolism. So I don't know if you can read this. I'm going to have to keep moving myself around, but. The 3 days with 3 parts creates a pattern that allows you as a reader to predict and interpret what's happening within the story. So I want to go over those scenes, and you may not see it after 1 scene. We've only read the first day, but you'll see this pattern really develop as we read more and more days. I've read the story a number of times, so I see the pattern very, very clearly, and on the first time, I certainly didn't see it at all. So one of the reasons that I'm here doing this lecture for you is to help you understand these things. So the hunting scene showcases an animal. The animal itself is intended to foreshadow how Gawain and the lady will behave in the bedroom scene, which follows. So in a sense, what you get in the hunting scene is sort of a symbolic pregame. Like anybody who's into sports, you watch the pregame, they tell you what to expect in the game. They give you some pointers and things to look for. That's how the hunting scene is. And so it's going to help the reader predict events in the main storyline. Right. And so then you're going to go to the bedroom or temptation scene, which is sort of the main event of each day. When you realize this is a Christian story, right? Like, the author is a priest, just like Beowulf is, and or the author of Beowulf is, and you start to think about the code of chivalry and the elements of faith and purity and things like that go in there. And then you start to think about the fact that Gawain is going to his death, and this importance of the lady, I think, comes into focus in a way that it maybe hadn't before. So for a medieval reader, I mean, we're reading it as modern readers, but for a medieval reader, adultery with another man's wife is what's called a mortal sin. It's a kind of sin that sends you to hell if you die, unconfessed for it. And so if Gawain gets with a lady and does this thing that she wants him to do, and then he goes and gets his head chopped off by the Green Knight, he's going to hell. And that's a big deal. So the encounter with the lady, I think in a lot of ways, the lady is an enemy of Gawain's, but it's a very different encounter than the kind of encounter you might have in Beowulf, where, Beowulf can just kill Grendel's mom with a sword. Gawain can't pull out his sword and be like, no, and kill the lady. Like, you can't. That would be an utter failure of chivalry and murder. And so Gawain's forced with this lady into a conflict with himself, an internal conflict, which is very different. And the landscape of this conflict is very different. If Beowulf ever died fighting one of his adversaries, he'd still go to heaven. But if Gawain fails himself, he goes to hell. And so it's a very different sort of conflict with very different outcomes. I want you to sort of understand the importance of these scenes to a medieval reader. And the bedroom scene is the main event of the day because Gawain is your main character. We're following him and seeing what happens with him. It's sort of a side scene with the hunting because the Lord isn't your main character at all. But then we have the reunion scene, and that's a way for you as a reader to analyze Gawain's success or failure. And part of the way that you do this is you analyze, as a medieval reader, the way that the animals carcass is processed, if you will. Remember the ridiculous detail that it went into about how they cut up the deer? It was to let you know that everything happened perfectly, which is sort of symbolic. It's a symbolic analysis of how Gawain handled himself in this bedroom scene. The lady never actually asked for anything. He never broke his courtesy. The one thing she asked for was a kiss, and he gave it to her. And theoretically, that would impugn his honor. But he kept his honor by giving the kiss back to the Lord and thereby keeping the terms of their agreement. And so he navigated that situation as perfectly as a knight can. And so the perfect way that the deer are processed by the hunters is an indication that Gawain did his job well. Speaking of which, then there's the sort of confession to the Lord of his daily activity. He gives the Lord that kiss, which is sort of, I think, a symbolic confession. And you got this character who is called the Lord. And, so there's a certain amount of allegory going on there. And you want to look at that. So let's take a look at sort of the grid pattern of this to help you understand it. And we'll continue to fill this out as the parts go by. But these are the 3 days. So day one, we hunted a doe. What does a doe represent? Well, a doe represents, sort of innocence and tradition. And I'm going to go back and look at some passages with you here in just a second. But if you look at the hunting scene, you will see that the deer is innocent. The deer have no idea they're about to be hunted. They're just sitting there. And the same thing's true with Gawain. He's just sleeping in his bed. He has no idea he's about to be hunted by the lady, right? And so she comes in, and just like the deer get trapped in that ring of beaters, the lady sort of traps Gawain in his bed. But at the same time, the deer are the traditional animals to be hunted. And so when you look at that hunting scene, it says that the law of the season should be followed and nobody should touch a male deer. It's doe season. They're not doing anything inappropriate. The entire hunting scene is appropriate from beginning to end. And the lady acts in an appropriate way in Sir Gawain's room. She's not doing anything sort of illegal by the rules or medieval belief, right? Like, she's not asking him to break his code of chivalry. She's suggesting that she might enjoy it, but she's not asking him to do it. And she, at the end of it, asks for a kiss, which is the traditional end of a first date. And so, you can see that Gawain is surprised. They talk. The lady offers herself to him, but never asks for anything. And they share a kiss. And so you can see that Gawain is innocent and she is traditional. And then the reunion scene, the deer is processed perfectly, and Gawain returns the kiss to the Lord, thereby keeping his code of chivalry intact. We can go through the code of chivalry, and we can look at Gawain's situation. Faith. Did he break faith? I mean, he kissed the Lord's wife. Courtesy says that he had to because she asked for it. He kept his honor by giving the kiss back and adhering to the terms of the deal. Impurity. Is this a gray area? Is kissing somebody else's wife a breaking of faith or purity? Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife is the commandment. So the question is, does Gawain want this kiss? And does he take the kiss because he wants it, or because he's honor bound to do so, or courtesy bound to do so? This is something that you as a reader want to think about as you continue to read. So we're going to jump back real quick, and we'll look at those hunting and temptation scenes, and hopefully you'll sort of see the pattern and how it works. One sec. I'm just gonna reread this hunting scene with the commentary that hopefully will help you out here. So long before dawn, the castle woke. The departing guests called for their grooms, and men came running saddles in hand and tied up their gear and packed their bags, and guests came ready to ride and leaped on their horses and shook the reins and rode where they wanted, each to his home. And the well-loved lord of that castle was not the last one ready. He and his men, after mass, okay, so he does that, correct, he does that traditionally. He ate a hasty meal, blowing his bugle, galloped to the hunt. He and his knights were set in their saddles before the sunlight gleamed. Huntsmen leashed up hounds, opened kennel doors, and called out dogs, blaring long notes and loud on their horns, and beagles bayed and barked and snarled. That's 3, bayed, barked, snarled, and were whipped and shouted back when they strayed. Aside 100 wonderful hunters, it's also interesting the dogs never stray, so sort of Gawain never strays. You can actually start looking at the analytics of this. They tell me, and keepers rode the places, and dogs ran free, and the forest swelled with horns and hooves and chases. I really just need to get rid of this bar. Can I do that? Yeah, look at that. And at the cry of the hounds, wild animals shook. Dazed deer in the valleys bolted for the hills. The deer are dazed, right? Like they have no idea that this hunt is coming. And they were shut in their woods by a shouting ring of beaters, but they're trapped. Stags with arching antlers were allowed through the gates, and flat-horned big bucks, for that noble lord had ordered that the law of the season be observed. This is a traditional hunt. When I say I'm going hunting, you assume I'm hunting deer, right? But hinds they hallooed back, hey, hey, watch out, and they drove does deeper into the valleys, and arrows slanted down, great broad arrows flying at every turn, cutting deep into brown hides. Ha! They screamed and bled, and high on the slopes they died, hounds hurrying after them, and hunters with horns blowing. So the arrows, some people have suggested, are representative of Gawain's words. His words are very effective at fending off the lady. He's very courteous. He ends her hunting, if you will, of him through language. And just like the deer offer very little resistance, she offers very little resistance. We're not going to have that on day 2, and you may have seen on that chart that day 2 is a wild boar. And wild boars are notorious for having thick hides and not being damaged by arrows and things like that. So you can sort of see maybe what the author's building here. Anyway, you can go through and you can look at this. But you go back to Gawain, and Gawain lies on a lovely bed, quiet until daylight comes creeping up the walls and over the coverlet and around the curtains, just like the deer. They're sitting in the valleys. And sleeping in peace, he heard suddenly a noise at his door and heard it swing to, and pulled his head from the pillow. He parted the edge of the curtain and peered carefully out, wondering who had entered. The lady of that castle, beautiful to watch, silently shut the door behind her and approached the bed, and Gawain, embarrassed, dropped his head and pretended to close his eyes. And the lady came near and quietly lifted the curtain and softly entered and gently sat on the edge of the bed and waited and watched for Gawain to awake. And he kept her waiting, hiding his head, wondering why she had come, what she meant to do. So you think, like there's a similarity between a deer who don't know they're about to be hunted and Gawain who doesn't know he's about to be hunted. And so I don't need to labor this point. Like, we're not going to read the whole scene again, but you can sort of see the similarities. And so now that you see them in this case, when we read day 2 of part 3, hopefully you can follow those on your own. Let me go back to my PowerPoint here for just a second, and then we can actually start reading. So day 2 of part 3 is a wild boar, right? And, a wild boar is you know, when you talk about a pig, a boar is a pig. Pigs are known for rudeness. When somebody's being rude, when somebody's being offensive, we call them a pig. You know, and that's definitely a symbolic association with boars that you want to look at. The other thing wild boars are known for is aggressive. They've got these tusks coming out, and they hurt dogs and hunters and are dangerous. And so, you know, which one of these is going to apply to who? Is the lady going to be rude to Gawain, or is she going to be aggressive? You know, like how is this going to work? And you want to look at that dynamic as the next chapter plays out. So just for fun, you know, I like pictures. So there's day one, you know, a nice little doe hunt, and here's day two. So without further ado, let's jump right into day two. I'm going to go back to the PDF and we'll read that through, and hopefully you'll enjoy that. I'm going to cut this video right here though, and you know, I'll start a new video for part two so that you know, you can pick that up if you need to later.